One question for you. Has anybody had saved a file in the last hour or in the last 10 minutes? Could you raise your hands, please? Don't be shy. Don't you? Have you saved a file in the last hour? Save a file. Yeah, save a file. Have you? Okay. So could you raise your hands? Yeah. Okay. We could say that today, most of people need to save files. And depending on how you have to use these files, you have to use one or another container. Okay, for example, if you want to use a collaborate editing tool, maybe you are going to use Google Docs. Or if you want to share your files between your devices, maybe you are using, for example, Dropbox. Okay, so we could say that everybody needs to save files. And the different kind of containers, they have, most of the time, different purposes. Okay? So you as a library developer, sometimes you might need to find, or you might need to develop an app that, sorry. Sorry. So maybe you have to develop an app that has to save files and use different kind of containers.
So that's precisely what we're going to tell you how to do that. I mean, to create your custom repositories for very specialized purposes.
Yeah. So imagine this is the story of a guy that is a library developer. We can name him, for example, Hulk Hogan. Yeah, he's a recognized library developer. And he has a customer that wants to use an app. And this app needs to save files in document library. But sometimes these files are going to be very, very big. So the file size limitation that we have in document library do not apply for these files. So what he has to do is to create, in a way, a container that doesn't check the file size for this kind of files, and at the same time, do not change the file size limit we have for document library, because that applies, for example, for wiki or for journal or whatever. So he thinks, hey, I could implement the repository interface. It's an API we have in library to create repositories. Okay, but it's not as simple as that. And why not? Yeah. Why is not as simple? Because, for example, the site validation doesn't apply, or has nothing to do, with the repository itself. It's in another layer, this check. And in the other hand, the repository interface is really, really big, and it's hard to implement because it has about 90 methods, and most of them are overloaded, so it's really hard to know what methods you should use. Okay, so very sad, he goes to the bar and finds a friend, which is another library developer. But he has an enterprise subscription, so he calls our support team, and he wants us to solve this. Yeah, he suggests that to us. We get the message, but before keeping going on with the story, I'm going to introduce you a little bit about the document library architecture, the old document library architecture. Okay, here we have 3 layers. Right here, this is our implementation from the repository for the document library. As you see, here we have the library repository, and that uses our DL services, which is the DL file entry or for DL folder. And that stores that in the storage you have chosen for, or you have configured in your library. The most important part, sorry. Yeah. The most important part is in the top, are the two top levels, DL app service and the repositories layer. Here, we have the DL app service. That is the entry point to the document library. If you want to use the document library service, you have to use this service, please, because it's supposed to be used with this. Okay? What it does is to call the repository methods and pass all the logic to them, so the logic is executed and the files are stored there. Okay, and the repository, it's the main interface from document library. It's the one you have to implement if you want to create a custom repository. There are many possible implementations. For example, in library, we have 4, like Documentum, CMIS, SharePoint, sorry, and the library repository itself. So going back with our friends, here they are, we owe them a solution for the problem. So we started to work on that on the DM team, and we found a good solution, we think, because we have extracted part of logic to small pieces that we call capabilities. And now Adolfo will explain you how the capabilities work.
Okay, so as Roberto said, there were 2 main problems with the previous, by previous I mean in 6.2, with the previous architecture of the documents and media. And it was that first, the interfaces, the main interfaces were big and were a bit difficult to implement. And secondly, there was a lot of extra things around, like validation or previous generation, things like that, that or were in the wrong place, like validation, for example, that was done at the bottom in the stores, or things are like previews that were done in the DLAPP service on the topmost layer. So it was like all or nothing. You had everything or nothing. You had no choice there. So what we did was we created these capabilities. Basically, what they are, well, this has nothing to do with OSGI capabilities, so don't mix them up. Basically, what we did was to split all that logic in little packages, little classes. And the idea was for those little classes to be reusable. So if you are developing a new repository and you say, OK, I want to have previews, you can take the preview thing, the preview capability, and drop it into your repository, and it should work. But if you don't want that, we should enforce on you the previews. And the same with validations. If you want custom validations for your repository, then you create your own validation capability, drop it into your repository, and that's it. And that's the basic idea. So we have this thing. This is the 6.2 architecture. So we have the DLAPP service. That's the main entry point. We have the DLAPP service calls the repository, which itself saves the actual bytes into the store. The store performs validations. But the DLAPP service did a lot of stuff. Like, as I said, I will generate the previews. I will raise Liferay sync events. I will do millions of things for you. So you don't want that. You want, for example, if you develop a customized repository to save temporary files, you don't want sync events. That doesn't make any sense. So what we did is to move that responsibility down to the repository. Oh, sorry. There it is. So when you define a kind of repository, like, I don't know, some repository, you choose what functionality you want in it. So you say, OK, I want this kind of repository, and I want previews, assets, workflow, and I don't know, maybe Liferay sync. I skipped a slide, as you can see. Oh, no, sorry. Really sorry. So to make this work, we had to introduce a new piece into the into the documents and media architecture, and that's the repository definer. And the job of that component is basically to provide to the portal with a way to create instances of those repositories. So it's basically kind of a factory. But also to attach to the repository the set of capabilities it has defined. And these repository definers are OSGI components, so you can deploy them at runtime and remove them if you don't want them, etc. And the nice thing about this is now the capabilities are really small. You have the preview capability with maybe 5 methods. You have the workflow capability, 6 methods. If you want to customize any of that behavior, it's easier than before because you have to implement a small thing. And that means that anybody should be able to create new capabilities. I mean, if you need to add custom behavior, it should be easy. And when we say anybody, we really mean that, okay? Anybody could do that. So, continuing with capabilities, there are mainly 2 kinds. There are public capabilities that are used to extend the API, because repositories, sorry, I'm mainly concerned with, it's an abstraction over a hierarchical file system, so it has files, folders, and nothing more. But maybe you have to add additional things. For example, to implement the recycle bin in Liferay, Liferay has to call some methods on the repository, right? So send this file to the trash can or recover it, whatever. So you have to provide those methods, but you don't want to pollute the repository API. So the trust capability is a public capability that exposes those methods, and then the portal can request, okay, do you support trash? Yes, give me the capability, I'll invoke the methods. That's the first kind. And the second kind is our private capabilities. And these are used when, for example, you need to customize the behavior, but you don't need, or you don't want anybody to call methods directly on the capability. And so how do you wire in that custom logic? In 2 different ways, basically. Repository events, and this is when a repository does anything, like adding a file, it will fire events. Okay, so it will say, okay, this file was added to the system, this file was deleted, this folder was moved somewhere. And you can attach repository event listeners so that you can do whatever you want. For example, Liferay Sync, we re-implemented it based on these events. So simply Liferay Sync is a single capability that registers a bunch of events and then does its thing. And the second way is repository wrappers. This is like the last resort thing because events are nice, but they are not. They cannot express everything you may want to do with it. So repository wrappers are a little less convenient to use, but they offer you more power. And they work more or less the same way like service builder service wrappers, so that you can override a method in the repository and decide if you call or not the main method, do your stuff before, then after, and it gives you a lot of flexibility. So now I'll show you a little code, not much, simply so you can see what a capability is like and how do you wire it into your repositories. So here it is. First, I'll show you the sync capability. Here it is. Oops. I don't know. I know why. Wait a minute. Let's see. It seems we have a problem. I cannot show you any code, apparently. Let me see. Command 1. No, but the thing is that I have an IntelliJ here, but it doesn't show in the. Just a minute. Oh, sorry.
Joder. it's done.
Do you hear me? Yes. Okay, so I'll show you your code. So here you have, do you see anything? I suppose not. Let me configure this. Let's put the default theme. No. We are out of luck, it seems. Okay, I'll reopen it, so maybe it will work. Okay, let's try again. No, not. Do you see anything? I hope this is enough because I cannot do it. I can do it better. Okay, I hope you see something. It's an interface called sync capability that extends capability. Capability is simply a marker interface that we use internally to know that it is a capability. Better, yeah. And as you can see, it doesn't expose any methods because it's simply, a private capability. I'll show you the implementation. So you can see that what it does mainly is it registers a couple of event listeners. So it says, OK, when you add a folder, execute this thing. When you delete a file entry, execute this other thing. And there are a lot of event listeners because sync basically has to listen for everything. So, and an event listener is pretty simple. It's basically a class with one method, interface with one method that when invoked, it will provide you with the model, the file, the folder, whatever you're listening to. And that's it. I mean, when you you implement your event listeners, you register them in your capability. Here it is. This is a method that is a callback that will be invoked by the portal. And for it to work, your capability has to implement repository event aware that simply defines this method. So pretty simple. Now I'm going to show you the trust capability. This is a public one, so it will extend the interface of your repository. So here you see there are a bunch of methods, all of them related to the recycle beam. I won't show you the implementation because it's pretty hairy, but I mean, if you had to, if you wanted to replace the Liferay implementation, you will only have to implement this interface, and it's not small, but it's not very big, so it's not that bad. And now comes I'll show you a sample definer. That's the thing that wires everything together, that tells the system which capabilities, what kind of repository it has. And I'll show you one we created because we needed to create temporary files. Do you see it? It's okay. So we needed to create temporary files in the portal. So we created this particular kind of repository that automatically deletes files when it has to, so you don't left the garbage in your file system. And the definer basically has two important methods. This one. This is the one that tells the system how to create repositories. So basically you're saying, OK, Liferay, when you need to create a repository, please use this factory I'm providing. The factory is very simple interface. It's these two methods to create local and non-local repositories. And then you have an opportunity to register any capabilities you wanted to have. Right now, there is quite a bit of boilerplate. I'll explain later why it is that way, but we have good reasons for this. Basically, as you can see here, we are saying, OK, registry, we are adding a public capability. We should rename these methods because to add public capability instead of add exported. I'll take a note. I will simply say, okay, so if you want to use a bulk operation capability, use this implementation for this repository. This thing that this is an implementation detail of this repository, and then here you see this is registering a private capability. So it's saying when you want to use the workflow, use this implementation that does nothing. It's a filler, and that's it. I mean, you simply have to register them. As I said, we want to remove all that boilerplate because the definer right now has two responsibilities. It has to declare which capabilities do you want to support, but right now you also have to instantiate the actual capability, and that's not good. We want to change that. So in an ideal world, you will simply say, okay, I want trust capability, and I want, I don't know, the workflow, and provide me whatever you have. And we will have that, but not right now. So that's capabilities mainly. There are little packages of functionality. There are public ones, private ones. Public ones are used to extend the API and provide new methods. And private ones are used to use events or wrappers so that you can customize how the repository works internally. And this is cool, but if you remember, Hulk had two problems, not one problem. He had the problem of the validation, that he wanted to override it, but he couldn't because it was done in the stores. We've solved that because we have created a validation capability so you can change how things got validated. But still, repositories are a bit complex. So it's big and it's not impossible to implement, but it's not nice. So we had to think on a solution. Here we are. This day we haven't shaved, so we look weird, but and okay, the only way to solve this problem is to create a new API basically. And we called it ExtRepository API. I won't tell you why it has the X thing on the front. It's not important. And the first question you may ask is, okay, what happens with the old API? So basically, we'll keep everything in place. I mean, if you've done something with repositories or local repositories, it should work still, so no problem there. And the new thing that we have basically is what we did is mainly removing things. We removed methods and we simplified it a little bit because, as Roberto said before, it has around maybe 80 methods, something like that. And right now, this ExtRepository has around 30. So we shrinked it quite a lot. Right now, for compatibility reasons, for backwards compatibility, internally the portal is still using the old API, but eventually we will make the new Ext API the official one. Right now, it's a simple jar that you can put in your component, but we will also eventually make it a proper GI bundle, so it's a first-class citizen in the portal. And all the translation between the new and the old API is done by Liferay itself, so you don't have to care about it. And well, this is basically what I said before. We've simplified the API, removed methods, so it's almost the same thing, but smaller. And as a little example, I don't think that we will have time to show it to you, but we developed an integration with Dropbox. It's a custom repository using the new API. I'll put the link with the code so you can take a look and see how it is implemented. And now I explain, like a high-level view of how it works. So when you look at the code, you'll be able to understand it. So we have Dropbox. No problem here. Everybody knows what that is. And the first piece of this repository is that we need to synchronize with Dropbox periodically, getting the changes to the remote file system. And this is the thing that does that job. So basically, it's a Quartz job that every 30 seconds polls the repository and asks for changes. So we get the changes, but we don't get the actual content of the files, okay? Only the hierarchy of the file system. Then we dump this into intermediate table, and we do this because otherwise it's painfully slow. So by keeping the hierarchy, the structure in the database, basically we are able to it's like the mobile application where when you navigate it's fast and when you try to access the file it's pretty slow. This is the same. Then we have the repository. That is the interesting thing and the thing you should look into when you get the code. It's the actual implementation, right? And then this will use the folder structure we have in the database, and when it has to do anything with the content, like updating the file, deleting it, whatever, it will get the content all deleted from Dropbox. And finally, we have the glue, the thing that puts everything together, and that's the definer. OK, I won't show you the code because we don't have time. We have 2 minutes. Here's the code. The tip of the branch contains the full version with all this synchronization thing. But I've created a tag, DVX simple info, that is slightly simpler. It's way slow. It's much, much slower than the full one, but it's easier to read. So what's next? As I said before, we're going to make this the official API. And remember, I commented about boilerplate, that in the definer you had to do a lot of stuff, you have to create the capabilities, and that's a consequence of, we could demodularize the Liferay repository because there were dependencies, for example, the verifying processes at startup that needed or assumed that there was always a Liferay repository in the system. So we couldn't get this out because otherwise we couldn't guarantee that. And once we do that, we'll be able to add more dynamism to capabilities so that you can not instantiate it into the definer, but you can say, OK, give me the trust capability. I will use whatever trust capability you have. That will be an OCI component. So when you will deploy a new trust capability, the system will pick it, and it should work. And finally, we also would like to generalize a little bit events. Because right now, all events are synchronous. So if you want them to perform something on the background, you have to implement that yourself. So we will provide some way to say, OK, this event is synchronous, this other is asynchronous, blah, blah, blah. And finally, we want to add a little more of flexibility so that you can choose when it gets executed. I want this event executed before adding the file, this other after adding the file, etc. And I don't know if we have time for questions.
We don't.
Well, if we don't, you can, we'll be around here and just tomorrow. So
yeah, we have a roaming mic. So if you got any questions, then please put your hand up. Is that a no? I think that's a no. OK, Adolfo, Roberto, thank you very much indeed. A round of applause, please.
Thank you.